Welcome to Misfits and Mystics podcast, where we have conversations intersecting faith, mental health, artistry, and social justice. We're so glad you're here. So get cozy.
But not too cozy, because we do keep it real on this podcast.
Listen with care.
And enjoy.
Hey, girl.
Hey, girl.
Why you so soft?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, I am so glad to hear your voice.
Thank you. It seems like it has been how long? It's been
a week.
Only what? See? Literally.
Yeah. Just a week.
That's funny. It's good to hear your voice, though.
Great. Oh.
Feeling emotional today?
A little.
Okay.
Not really, though. So, how was Chicago's Pride?
Chicago Pride was ass. No, I'm just kidding. So my personal experience was ass. But I mean, I've seen a few videos and I saw people's outfits and stuff, and so I think it was an overall pretty decent experience. I don't think it was the greatest thing for everyone, honestly, because nobody really. Well, I was about to say nobody was really messing with the rain, but then again, that's not true. So I don't know. My personal experience was just not good, honestly, especially for it to be the first one. But I'm gonna let it go. I'm gonna try again next year. But
yes.
Actually, will I be? Oh yeah, I should be in Chicago. Yeah, I'll try again next year.
Yeah, we should maybe plan. I'll be more mindful about when Chicago's Pride is, and I will make plans to come up, and we'll have a ball. But yeah, I mean, it rained here for Pride, but it wasn't an all day rain. So once it kind of cleared away, it was great. But I guess if you're just going to see a parade, rain is not ideal. So
True.
Yeah. True. Well, we'll just celebrate when I come up there, and yeah. Yes, well, June is Pride, but July is Wrath.
It is sex.
And we are coming with fire this month, breaking down all of the constructs. Sex. What is? Are you doing some ASMR background music or?
Yeah, that's what that was.
Okay. Yes, we're talking about sex. Last week we had Whitney on, and we kind of gave an overview of our thoughts on sex. So, Alicia, I want to know, I'm going to ask you the same question that we started off with last week. How was sex first introduced to you? And how was it discussed growing up?
So you mean introduced as far as conversation?
Yes.
Okay. I don't ever remember having a sex talk with my parents. I don't know if they ever had a sex talk with any of my siblings, honestly. And I don't really remember any type of sex talks in church or anything. So honestly, to be very honest, sex has been introduced completely through personal research, overhearing conversations, and then figuring things out, personal experience, and pornography. That's literally it. I've never had a sex talk with my parents, and if I did, it wasn't anything big enough for me to remember it. But I don't think I did.
So then, when you say you didn't have a sex talk, are you saying that they didn't sit you down and say, this is what sex is, and this is what you should do in response to what we think sex is? Or are you saying that just sex was not discussed at all?
Um, the first one.
Okay.
Sex being discussed. Hmm. I would say like it was and it wasn't. Like if it came up for whatever reason, somebody's asking a question or somebody says something, or my mom is making a comment or something, then like it would come up then. It wasn't like it was a thing that we just don't talk about. Like it was never this like weird, you don't speak on that type of thing. It
Mm.
was more so just like we didn't really have a reason to talk about it. So they didn't sit me down and have a conversation, but we also didn't really have a reason to talk about it, you know?
Yes. I'm attempting to not project my assumptions onto why that is, but I'm just gonna say it anyway. Do you think that that's because uh it was assumed or understood that unless you were married, you like weren't and shouldn't be having sex anyway, so there's like no reason to discuss?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And also like I don't know if my parents ever put out there like, "Oh, if something is going on, like come talk to us." But that's just kind of how I've realized my parents, and they've set the tone for our family. Well, they did. We've kind of like started to change some things, but there's definitely always been this tone of if I don't have a reason to talk about it, meaning you're not asking me any questions, or I don't feel like I absolutely need to talk to you about this, then it's just not something that we talked about. And that's not even just with sex, that's just in general. So even with like depression and anxiety and stuff, my family, like, we never had a talk about that because it just was never brought up. So it wasn't like, oh, we're not going to talk about that because we don't believe in that. It was just the fact that, like, that's not a topic that's just going through my head. But if you bring it up to me, then, you know, then they'll definitely have conversation. Like, a lot of things, I feel like it's the same way that I am with my friends. Like, unless I, like, really, really notice something and I feel like I need to say something, then, like, I'm not going to say anything. But if you come to me, that's the best way that you can have any type of like talk with me or to figure out what I think, how I feel, is to actually ask me questions. So like bring something to me directly to show me that you care about, my thoughts or whatever on the situation. And that's just kind of like how my family has always been. Like what to just I don't know, it would be very out of the ordinary to just be sitting there talking about sex because who brought this up, you know?
Yeah. Who brought this
Yeah,
up?
it's not like one of those situations where we're like sitting at the table eating family dinner and then somebody's like, "Yeah, so about sex." Like that, we don't have talks like that. Like
Mm,
that's random.
yeah. I mean, it is random to just like bring up topics out of the blue, but you know how you're having a conversation and then one thing leads into another. Um, but as we were saying last week, I think particularly with sex, sex is such a taboo thing, and we've been conditioned to believe that we shouldn't be openly discussing sex because it's not appropriate conversation. You know, that's not conversation that you should be having at the dinner table or at the dinner party or at the cocktail club. You know, like, and then you definitely shouldn't be having that conversation in sacred spaces because we've been conditioned to believe that like sex is like this a private thing,
Hmm.
maybe. So because it's private and intimate, you know, we're just going to keep that to ourselves. But I find it interesting that in the age of transparency, you know, we're super transparent about everything else, but sex is still one of a lot of the major topics that's being left behind in the age of transparency. And so I'm trying to uncover why that is.
Do you mean in the age of transparency within like Christianity or just in general?
Just in general, I mean, we're living in a culture now where transparency is a thing, whether it's celebrated or ridiculed. People are definitely feeling more empowered to be transparent. I mean, just even how social media, like how social media works, the things that we post on social media, there were used to be a day where we wouldn't have said any of that stuff even within the intimacy of like our close friends or families, let alone, sharing that with the whole world,
Yeah.
like there are things about my life that pre social media age, I probably was conditioned to be like, no, you should not share that with others. But now I think things like social media has definitely ushered in a new level of comfort and courage to speak on things and speak on how we're feeling and how we're experiencing the world. But I
Yeah.
think of all the things that we're transparent about, sex is still one of those taboo topics that we're just like, oh no, I'm not going to talk about that. Or if we do talk about it, it's coming from a specific narrative that usually is centered around shame and not enlightenment or empowerment or pleasure or any of those things.
Yeah.
So specifically within the Christian context, I think within Christianity we're getting a little more transparent to talk about sex, but more so to combat, to help us feed the narrative, like the us versus them mentality, like, well, the world is doing this but we are doing this, and perpetuating a level of shame and like othering, that happens. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today in relation to sex. Today we're going to be focusing on and diving a little deeper into purity culture, virginity, the myths surrounding that, and continuing the dialogue about sexual ethics, particularly that center around celibacy and abstinence. Um, so I want to briefly define what I mean by purity culture because I recognize that there may be some people that have never heard that term. When I speak of purity culture, I'm mostly speaking through the lens within a Christian context because that is my lived experience, and also I want to say Alicia's experience as well. And a lot of our listeners come from a Christian context. So we're going to be speaking through that lens. But basically, purity culture is the view that anything outside of sex within the confines of heterosexual marriage is taboo or wrong. It forces us to limit our sexual nature into a heteronormative lens or box, oftentimes forbidding or placing restrictions on things like autonomy and agency over our pleasure and sexual identity. Usually, it enforces very restricted gender roles, such as women needing to be modest and submissive, and men as the dominant role. And regardless of gender, it perpetuates shame for exploration. And it's usually enforced within the family and church settings. So that's what I mean by purity culture when we're talking about that. And I find that within that purity culture, there's definitely it definitely brings about a lot of double standards with like sexual empowerment between men and women. Um, it brings about the traditional concept of virginity and your worth being centered around, how pure you are. Like our sexual history is deeply tied to our worth as people a lot of times. And I think that may not be the intention for a lot of people, but when we root ourselves in this purity culture, or we could also use the word like being very legalistic about our sex lives or our sexual ethics as people, it definitely brings about this idea that holiness equals, you know, virginity, like being a virgin until you're married. And, then when you get married, you have sex and you procreate and you create this nuclear family. And, yeah, just this very boxed way of being. And not saying that that life is wrong. I'm not saying that waiting to have sex until you're married and having children and all of that, like all of that is great and beautiful, but that's one option, that's one choice, um that can be beautiful and fruitful, but it shouldn't be the one size fits all, end all be all, because maybe that doesn't work for
Yeah.
everyone. And we're going to get into more of that. But I found three articles that I kind of wanted to sift through. Two of them are from the same source. So the first two come from CBE International, and this one is the 7 lies that purity culture teaches women. Because I will say that purity culture definitely impacts women in a very unique way. Not saying that it doesn't impact men as well, but when we last week I mentioned, patriarchal systems definitely favoring men, putting men in a place of privilege over women. So I'm kind of referring back to that idea. But this was written by Natalie Collins, and she kind of just gives a list of these myths that purity culture teaches us and how that hasn't really been helpful to us. And I'm just going to just list what she says. The first myth she says is that women are responsible for men's sexual sin. She says that purity culture claims that women's bodies and clothing can cause men to stumble with lust, rather than placing the responsibility for sexual thoughts or actions on the man or boy who enacts them. Purity culture places the responsibility on the woman or girl being looked at and lusted after. And I like what she says here. It says, it's almost as if Jesus said, if your eye causes you to sin, go and tell the thing you're looking at to stop looking that way in front of your eye. But all of us that know scripture knows that that's not what Jesus said. He said, if your eye causes you to stumble, to do what? Pluck it out.
I had to pause. I had to stop myself because I was about to yell. And then I realized how bad that would sound. So I said it with you, but just silently, just so you know.
Yes, I know. Yes, pluck it out. So let's kind of digest that a little bit. I think I've mentioned before on this podcast my story of the church that I attended in college, where the pastor's wife said indirectly to me that I was causing my brother to stumble by wearing pants. I'm triggered, you're triggered, we're all triggered. Okay, so taking deep breaths. Um yeah, so I don't know if you've experienced anything like that, or if you, I don't know, I don't, you just chime in, you know.
I
um
don't know if I have. Nah, I doubt it. Cause I don't be wearing. Well, you know, I don't go in spaces that I know would be that way. Like I usually, if there's anything that I'm always overly careful about, is people's churches. If I'm going to a French church, I always ask, "What do you all wear? What's appropriate?" And sometimes people are like, "Girl, what do you just put on your clothes?" And I'm like, "No, because you may think that your church is fine, and I walk in here with jeans and a t-shirt, and they're not okay with that. But you wouldn't know that because you always dress a certain way at your church. You know, like there are people who just naturally
mm,
always dress up to go to church, but they think like, oh yeah, my church is open till you dressing however. But you wouldn't know that because you've never dressed however. So no, I'm gonna be extra careful. So y'all ain't got nothing to say to me because then I'm gonna get real mad and it's gonna be a problem. And I don't want to cuss nobody out or fight nobody in the house of the Lord. But I will. If we be clear, that's the issue. I know that I will. So we're gonna keep it from happening. Preventative measures. Amen.
Amen. Dude, I fucking miss you, man. Just a little side note.
I just did so much.
She said, I don't want to fight anybody in the house of the Lord because I will.
That's the key point. I will. If I do, I
Period.
will.
Yeah, I mean, nothing like that ever happened to me growing up in church, but you're right. It's because um people, like, I just was automatically like dressed a certain way according to the culture of that church. I never fathomed that I could dress any
Right.
other way,
Yeah.
you know. Um Now I did start to take note as I came into my teen years that if there were people that were dressed different than what was the norm, that there would be these subtle shifts in people's body language, or how they address that person. I think I learned that the first and only time actually that I took Danielle to church with
Hmm.
me. And I think part of it was the race thing, which that's for another episode. But it was also, I think it also was about the way she was dressed, because she was dressed a little more casual, and that wasn't the overall norm at my church at the time. So it was very much like, you're not one of us because you're not dressed like us. So there were elements of that, but I didn't experience specifically like the distinction of women dress this way, men dress this way, and women are responsible for men's
Hmm.
lust. Like, I didn't experience that until I got to college fully. And then I realized, oh, okay, this is a thing. And I think because I grew up in a church that didn't really, you know, perpetuate that, at least not so blatantly, I was very shocked. And I was offended. Okay. And the rebel rouser in me was just like, wanted to look at her and be like, first of all, fuck you for your passive aggressiveness in this Sunday school class. And second of all, I am wearing pants. I am fully covered. So if this man is still lusting after me, then I just can't win. Like, you're just saying that by me existing in my body, you know? And then I got to thinking, well, I guess it really doesn't matter if I'm fully covered or if I'm wearing revealing clothing. You're telling me that just by being me, that I'm responsible for this man like lusting after
Hmm.
me?
That's all
No.
your fault.
And she was specifically referring to the deacons, and I kind of wanted to be like, if the deacon has a lust issue, then he don't need to be no deacon. he needs to have a seat until he gets his life together because, you know, that's neither here nor there. So
No,
that's one
that's
of the
here and
myths
there.
that purity culture.
I said that's here and
Huh?
there.
Right. So the second one she talks about is women's bodies are something to be ashamed of. If women's bodies are blamed for lust, if the church claims that they need to be covered for the sake of men, this inevitably leads to shame. Rather than celebrating the many wonderful things about the physical shapes God has given them, women and girls are encouraged to see their bodies solely as possible temptations to men. So yeah. Yeah, when that happened, I did start to have this element of shame, like, ooh, like, are people noticing aspects of my body? And like, I think as women and girls in society, we already have that stigma of like being super conscious of our bodies anyway. So then when you add on that layer, it just, you're objectifying me. And when you've been objectified, it's like, oh, so I'm just a sexual object to be toyed with instead of being a full individual that can celebrate my body because my body is mine,
Hmm.
you know? Um, yeah. And then the third one, she says women shouldn't have sexual desire. Purity culture sometimes implicitly and other times explicitly states that the reason men's sexuality is women's responsibility is that their lady brains are so different that they don't really have a sexuality and don't want to have sex. Unlike men, apparently, who think about sex every 3 seconds, women are non sexual. It's just science. God made men unable to control their sex drive or sexual desire, leaving it up to women to take responsibility.
This is extremely disgusting.
Yes. I think that point is something that I definitely saw more of growing up, like this idea that men are just these like sex maniacs and they can't help like, being aroused all the time. And I definitely grew up in an environment if where it wasn't normal to see women like express their sexuality. Because I think people assume when we talk about sexuality, we're just talking about sexual orientation, but like sexuality covers a spectrum of
Hmm.
things. So just women being sexual, it was seen as like, oh, you're being deviant. Whereas if men were sexual and honest about their sexual desires, it was like, oh, that's just like boys being boys. And and it's up to us girls to like give into their desires. But then once you give into the desire, now you're gonna be viewed as a slut or a whore. So then again, it was like, I can't win. Like, I'm supposed to please the man, but if I please the man, then now I'm wrong.
Yeah, it's just too much. It's too much. Okay, I, I can't even find words. It's just too much.
Mm,
Why? Like, it's so. I think it's so.
yeah,
Literally, you feel me? It's. I think
I
it's
feel
literally
you.
so frustrating because of the fact that it's like, yeah, you could, realize all of this is a part of like purity culture and blah blah blah, and just be like, yep, nope, I'm good, fuck that, and then have like the position of like, I don't really care what people think, blah blah blah, whatever. But then you always like, there's no getting away from it. Like, no matter how much you are like, that's not a part of my world. If you're on social media, if you're out dating, like, you're going to run into it somehow. And it just reminds you of how stupid the shit is. The fact that we're still
Hmm.
trying to like get people out of that mindset and help people understand that this is not true. Like, if you are a man and you've been with, I would say at least maybe like 3 to 5 women, or fuck it, if you've been with a woman, period. But I'm saying for
Mm-hmm.
the sense of like the whole comment about men having like this super high sex drive and not being able to control it. Basically, I'm trying to say I know so many women who have higher sex drive than men. Like I've heard people say like I have a higher sex drive than my husband. I have a higher sex drive than my boyfriend. And I'm trying to figure out like, are they not attracted to me, or like blah 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 blah, or they don't even know that it's like a difference in sex drive. They just think like, oh, they're not having sex with me that much, so like, what's going on? And it's just like the woman in the situation, we wanted to have more sex, and oftentimes I think that just a lot of the issue and why sex talk has not so normalized yet is, one, definitely fear, but two, like you all were talking about last week, like just misinformation. Like people just really don't know what they're doing. Like they literally don't know what they're doing. And I have to laugh at it because it's just like, what? But at the same time, it's like that's actually really sad because so many people have had so many sexual experiences and thought it was good and it actually wasn't good, but they didn't know that, thought it wasn't good, and it was just something like different or super uncomfortable that they actually should have said, like, I don't like this, but didn't know that they had the agency to do so. It's just like so many different things that can go wrong in not knowing, that I think people just like, you know how like people are talking about something around you and you have no clue what they're talking about, or you're just like, okay, I kind of know about this, but like I don't really know everything they're talking about. And instead of asking questions,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of feel like you said, ashamed. I kind of feel ashamed for not knowing. So I'm just going to sit here and pretend that I know by just being quiet and not putting anything into the conversation. So that way you don't really know that I don't know because I'm not saying anything. And you could take me being quiet as just like, just chilling and taking in the conversation, thinking that like I know what you're talking about, and I literally have no clue. And then people don't do their like backup
Yeah.
research. So like what I was saying, for me, sex being introduced to me, like if I heard something or saw something, or even if like it's like an image like popped in my head or something, I would go like look up stuff as much as possible, which I will kind of say is bad, or was bad, because I was literally just like so young and so lost. But in the end, it's turned out to be really good because I learned about a whole lot way before I even started having any type of sexual relations. Um, and then some of the things that I learned about, if I didn't actually know or fully understand what I was researching, then once I got to a point that I was like, okay, which is at different times, I would ask people like, I saw this, what does this mean? Or like, blah, 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 blah. Which is why I'm at the point now, I'm definitely not a sex expert or anything, but I do honestly believe that I know a whole lot more about sex than a lot of my friends. And that includes my friends that are like 30 plus. I've literally taught so many women about the different ways that you can orgasm. And they've been like, what? Literally had no clue. And I'm just like, yes, let me put y'all on. Y'all might not even be having sex right now, but just let me tell you so that you know going into it,
Mm.
like what you want, what you want to try. You know, it's just like, it's a lot of I don't knows, and nobody wants to be okay enough to be like, listen, I don't know, and I know you don't know, so let's figure it out.
Well, yeah. Well, because we are brought up to think, especially with women, we're brought up to think that, again, we, that the responsibility of, like, it's our responsibility to make sure that the man is getting his pleasure. But when we have the agency to take ownership of our pleasure, there are negative consequences associated with it. So then we're like, I'm not going to say anything. And then over time, we don't have open, candid conversations. And then that's where the ignorance steeps
Mhm.
in, you know? The information gets lost over time. And some of it is, throughout history, just how with anything knowledge evolves, we continue to learn. Some things that were mysterious are just common sense now. Like we're still changing and evolving. Like I would imagine that maybe 50 years from now, somebody may be listening to this podcast and be like, what the hell were they talking about? Like, how primitive, there's still a lot that we don't know. And that's like the mystic side of things, of embracing that mystery. But there's a difference between like embracing the mystery and just, not knowing because we just literally don't know yet, versus people choosing to not know, or being conditioned to walk in ignorance because getting the truth uh, is presented to be something that is bad or sinful. So a lot of Christian circles, perpetuate this idea that simply just being educated about sex is going to open up this door to people having sex, or a type of sex that is not acceptable, under the gaze of oppressive religion, um, which is ludicrous to me, but yeah. So the sixth myth that she says, it says if women have sex before marriage, everything will go wrong.
Wait,
Purity culture makes it clear that if women or girls have sex before marriage, absolutely everything that can go wrong will. The only solution offered is to become re-virginized, and even then, girls and women are still seen as and often feel like damaged goods.
can you read the first line again?
If women have sex before marriage, everything will go
Damn.
wrong.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's crazy because I was actually just having a conversation with one of my friends, and she was talking to me about how she grew up in an um, evangelical culture, purity culture type church, that she did the True Love Waits class, and she got a purity ring. And for the class, she did this skit where she had to compare herself to chewed up gum if she were to have sex before marriage. And she was telling me how that very moment, at the time, she didn't realize how traumatizing that was. But when she married her husband, how it all sort of made sense, in that, because they didn't wait till marriage, that she kind of had these feelings of guilt, in the sense that, oh, because we didn't wait till marriage, now everything is going to go wrong now that we are married, and continuing to have
Mhm.
sex, And she had to go through a process of unlearning that and recognizing that, no, like everything's fine. I've been with this man, for X amount of time, and we love each other. And regardless of when we were having sex before marriage versus during marriage, like, it doesn't matter. But that fear, that anxiety was very much informed by her upbringing and experience of people, kind of perpetuating that idea that if you have sex before marriage, like, it's, you're
Yeah.
doomed, um, when that's not really the case. I definitely thought that at some point. And like I mentioned last week, it definitely fed my idolization of staying a virgin. And when I did have sex, I was like, well, um, I think I had to reconcile the fact that, like, oh, I've been carrying this fear that everything's gonna go wrong once I have sex. Add to the fact that the person that I had sex with was not a man. So now I was like, well, I'm just like double doomed. um, but everything was fine. You know, I've never been so, like, I'm right where I'm supposed to be in this very moment. I'm at peace. I love the Lord. The Lord loves me. I am not damaged goods. I
Let them
am
know.
still Abra. Like, nothing happened. I had sex. I had a good time. And we move on.
Period. That chewed up gum thing
So,
is so. Oh my gosh, that's so damaging.
yeah.
Chew.
To be reduced to like, oh, you're just damaged
And
goods,
I
you
wonder
know.
what is the same thing for men.
Girl, no.
That's real cute.
Okay, I'm not gonna say that. Well, because that's the other piece of it too, is that a lot of times churches and even schools sometimes, like, they'll separate the
Hmm.
girls from the boys. So I don't know what the boys were being told. And that's why I wanted to reference people to Kevin Garcia's work around his conversations around sex and purity culture, because he has the perspective of, like, growing up as a boy and, like, the messages that boys are receiving, and how that was damaging to them as well, particularly with uh queer people, but even still, like, even straight men, because I know Whitney and I have talked about this several times about how straight men are victim of that too, because there's certain like, purity culture and heteronormativity perpetuates this idea that, yes, like, men have a little bit more agency when it comes to their pleasure, but it's still caged into a certain kind of pleasure. Like, men can only get pleasure, the only acceptable pleasure that men should be having is from a woman, but not from another man or a person that may be non-binary or trans, or even men receiving pleasure where they're not the dominant role during the
Hmm.
sex act. So if, a woman tops a man, then that, this message, like, oh, your
Hmm.
masculinity is being threatened, as opposed to, just doing what feels good. Because, side note, true facts, um, men, well, I'm not going to say all men, but a lot of men, their most pleasurable zone is in the butt, y'all.
Fact.
Gay or straight. And there are ways for men to receive that pleasure, whether they are having sex with a man or a woman. But we don't want to explore what it is for a woman to, kind of take that dominant role to ensure that that man receives the pleasure that he's seeking in that way, because we associate anal sex with gay sex. So now there's a lot of straight men walking around not getting their needs met because they're afraid that by getting their needs met, they're going to be labeled as gay. No, you're not gay because you want to have an orgasm, okay? So, there's that. Um, Finally, the seventh one is there's no difference between sexual abuse and sex before marriage. This is the biggest piece, and this is where I have to say right now that I mean, we've been talking about things that are probably triggering, but this right here, if you need to fast forward a little bit, please do so. It says purity culture doesn't talk about consent. It deals in the right/wrong dichotomy of pre and postmarital sex. Sadly, this leaves many women and girls assuming that the pain and hurt they experience when men or boys sexually abuse them is about having premarital sex. At 17, when my boyfriend pressured, manipulated, and coerced me into sexual activity, I was convinced this was the normal feeling of failing to honor God with my purity. When he caused me physical pain, humiliated me, and degraded me, I thought my responses were about my failures, not about his choice to abuse and exploit me. The irony is that purity culture is anything but pure. It is it is woven with oppression and lies. It is yet another weapon of patriarchy to control and marginalize women. I believe that the church will continue to breed shame, sexual dysfunction, and pain until purity culture is rejected and replaced with a new ideology rooted in Christ, one that celebrates the bodies God gave women and men and delights in the beautiful gift of mutual and committed sexual intimacy and sexuality. So I think that is probably the biggest piece that I've seen within purity culture, where because we're not educated on what sex is, then we also don't know what sex isn't. Because I want to make this very, very important point. If it wasn't consensual, it wasn't sex. I'm going to say it again. If it wasn't consensual, if it isn't consensual, it's not sex. That's abuse. That's assault. That's rape. That's molestation. That's harm. Not sex. So we assume that because a sexual act was done to you, that now you were a willing participant and now the fault is on you as well. It's not. If you did not consent to what was done to you, then you were abused and you are not at fault. The person that did that to you is at fault. So, but unfortunately, because we're not educated, we're not having conversations, there are a lot of people walking around, women and men, who are walking around feeling shame for something that they shouldn't feel any shame for because they didn't do anything wrong. Because, like she said, she was coerced, manipulated, abused, forced, which kind of relates to the previous myth about, women being responsible for the man's pleasure. So we think that, oh, well, it's up to me to make sure that he's getting off, and then the man thinks that I have a right to get off by any means necessary, even if that means forcing you to do something that you don't want to do. We all have a right to pleasure, but not at the expense of someone else's pain. So I think consent is the biggest piece that is missing, especially in the church. The church is too busy concerned about who's fucking who, and they're not discussing the fact that many people are being harmed. And so I would rather we have candid conversations about sex and people go off and have good sex even though that may make us uncomfortable because we've been told that sex is only for straight married folk. And so y'all are too concerned about, you know, other people getting to enjoy sex, but at the expense of perpetuating this idea that those that are being abused have to carry that weight and responsibility when that doesn't
Mm.
belong to them. And I'm calling you out, Catholic Church. I'm calling you out, Southern Baptist Church, because those are the two major uh, churches and denominations that are under fire right now for perpetuating that bullshit. But there are others too. But yes, I'm gonna say names: Southern Baptist Church, Catholic Church. Get it together. Let's talk about consent. Let's protect all of our people, all of our children. And so I don't want to hear it when people are like, why are people leaving the church? Well, Exhibit A.
I agree.
Mm.
Yeah. It goes back to what you were saying before. The shoot, what's the word? Where you're like being real. Transparency. I don't know why I'm saying
Transparency.
something with an A. But yeah. Yeah. It's the lack of transparency. Like, I don't know, people are just tired of like bullshit. So until you can be real with me,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of how you personally think or what you personally believe I should believe, just give me the facts and let me decide.
Woo, preach that. Give me the facts and let me decide. Whew.
I mean, we were like,
I mean,
but I was about to say, like, I feel like anytime that especially recently, anytime that I've heard people talking about things within how the church does things, and it comes down to some type of, one word line or whatever, like I just said, just give me the facts and let me decide. If you think about it, we put it in our terms, but then it always goes back to how God is, literally. Like God gives us the facts and then said,
mm-hmm.
you have free will. This is what'll happen if you do this. This is what'll happen if this is what you choose. But go ahead, do your thing. And so it's just so crazy that we believe in God. We say we trust God. We say we follow God. We say we want to be examples of God's love, and you know, we're the hands and feet. But like I feel like we literally do the opposite of what God stands for constantly. Like if God gives me free will, why are you trying to control me? Like the person who I believe created me is not even trying to control me. But you're like, well, it ain't no other option because this is the option. But actually it is another option, but I'm not gonna give you that option because you probably would choose that. So in order for me to make sure that you do what I want you to do, what I think you should do, I'm just gonna tell you it's just this one option. And by the time you find out that it's other options, you're now damaged and a little fucked up. But I saved you from something. You didn't. Like you didn't. You didn't help me at all. You left me out here ignorant. So thanks. Thanks. Shit.
Mm. Woo! Yeah, all of that. Mm. We didn't come to preach today, but
But y'all gonna get this word, okay?
okay. um so yeah, that was a 7 myths, and then there's also another one that has like 5 more myths that is more centered around like what those lies like promise us, but those promises don't really exist. Basically, to summarize it, like the myth about, if I wait to have sex, before marriage, if I wait until marriage to have sex, I mean, then the myth is that this promises me a good, fruitful, healthy sex life. But that's not always the case
Mm.
for many people because because we don't know what we're doing. We get married and we just assume we walk into these assumptions that, oh, now we're married now and now we're just going to magically know how to do sex. But we don't, and there's a lifetime of learning that has to occur. There's a lifetime of discovering yourself and your partner, which is a thing of life anyway, but particularly in the context of sex, there's a level of intimacy and trust that goes into that. And when we aren't given the permission to, one, celebrate our bodies and explore ourselves and figure out what makes us feel good, and then we're expecting this other person to just know, you know, oh, this is what's going to make you feel good. No, you have to have a level of communication. You kind of have to go in knowing a little bit something about how your body works and what you might like and what you might want to try. But because we don't have that opportunity, the first time for many people is probably going to be awkward and, not good. or not the greatest. Um but it's just like with anything, when you're learning a new thing or a new skill or coming into new experiences, not saying that it's gonna has to be this tragic, horrible thing, but there is gonna be a level of like, oh, I didn't know this, so that hindered my ability to fully experience this in a way that is possible, versus like maybe your umpteenth time of participating in that act, you're like, oh, I'm getting the hang of it. It's just like dance. Like the first time I tried a shuffle ball change, it wasn't the most pleasurable experience because I was like, what the fuck is my foot
Right.
doing? But now I've done a shuffle ball change so many times that it's like, oh, that feels good, because I know what I'm doing, you know? Um, so there's that, like these false promises that just don't exist. And again, perpetuating the fear that if you do have sex before marriage and now you're just a dried up fruit and no more pleasure for you, and now you're going to have this miserable marriage because you're damaged. But I would say that in my experience, most of my friends who chose to have sex with their partner before marriage, I would say that it's really no different, or probably have expressed to me that their sex life is flourishing. And part of the reason was because they got to explore one another before making this life commitment to each other. And so they're like, yeah, it was beneficial for us to test the waters to see, do I really want to be having sex with this person forever? um and I'm kind of, as I stated last week, my sexual ethic is kind of challenging that in the sense, well, who says that the person that you're married to is the only person that you need to be having sex with or having sex with them at all? But okay, that's a little out there. Sorry guys, I'm a heretic. Stone me. Just go
Come on,
ahead.
stone me.
I dare you. I dare you. Try
Oh
it.
my god.
Um, see what happens. Um, but But for those that are still within that traditional ethic of like the person that I'm married to is the only person that I'm gonna be having sex with, um, it's probably I could see the benefit of being like, well, before we make this commitment, let's kind of see, if you're the one, and you might not be the one. And I'm not saying that the like your relationship should only be centered around sex, but to deny that it's not a factor, well, that's just being
Yeah.
dishonest. So, yeah. What a mess.
A hot, hot mess.
This is very messy, very slippery,
Mm.
very wet. No pun intended.
We're changing lanes here.
That's what she
Oh
said.
my gosh.
um, yeah, we talked about this off the mic, but I wanted to let's go ahead and bring this on mic. I kind of want to move into the sexual ethic of abstinence and celibacy and virginity, and how one, I personally think the traditional concept of virginity isn't real because one, there's this assumption that the only real sex is sex between a man and a woman, and I don't believe that. I believe that sex is really whatever you want it to be, and that we can't. The only the only criteria really is that it's done with consent and care. But you know, maybe for you, like holding hands is a form of sex. I don't know. It isn't for me, but maybe it is for someone else. Um, but yeah, there's this assumption that the only real sex is penetrative sex between a man and a woman. And yeah, no. So that's one reason why I think virginity, like, is arbitrary in a sense, because it's like according to whom, and
Yeah.
but also just how we measure virginity as well is has a lot of myths surrounding that, particularly with the hymen myth, like where there was a time, I mean, and there are people that still believe this, where we thought that if your hymen broke, then you weren't a virgin anymore, and perpetuating those terms like popping your cherry and all of that stuff, when really, like, your hymen could break for many reasons. Like, you could break your hymen riding a bike. So basically, you're telling 7-year-old girls that every time they ride their bike and they break their hymen, that they're damaged goods. Yeah, no.
Never thought
um,
about it that way.
yeah. And so that leads me to the third article that I just wanted to highlight a few things. And that this was through Healthline, and it's the virginity myth. Let's think of sex like Disneyland. And it was written by Crystal Ewan. And she basically just kind of goes into how a lot of what she knows about sex was through conversations with her friends. And she kind of goes into the virginity tests. She states in 2013, India's Supreme Court finally ruled out the two-finger test. Apparently, if a doctor could fit two fingers inside a rape victim, that meant she consented to sex. The country of Georgia still has a tradition called Yang or Yinge, I guess, where the groom shows a blood-stained sheet to his relatives as proof of virginity. So I guess in their country, if the woman bleeds after or during sex, then that means that she's a virgin. But we all know that it's different for
Yeah.
everyone. Some women might have a little blood, some might not bleed at all. It just, And then my thing is, why is that anybody's
Seriously,
business?
like what? You're going off blood,
Right.
weirdo.
That's insane. Um, and she points out that these virginity tests are only expected of women. While physical probing by medical professionals don't happen so obviously in the West, we still have sexist ideologies that probe our minds. Just look at the hymen myth, and the like pop your cherry idea. And, she talks about how this kind of creates this like damage of mixed messages. Yes, there's always she talks about there's always a political, religious, cultural, or educational context, but even in those situations, we've adopted an aggressive or possessive tone or both. People say losing your virginity like it's a bad thing, but there's also no agreement on what losing means. Some focus on when you have sex for the first time, where she kind of argues that instead of talking about when we have sex, we should talk about how. The how. Expectations around losing your virginity affect the experience far more than we think. More than once, friends have told me the first time always sucks. After my friend told me how she lost her virginity, I felt jealous. She was so confident and nonchalant. I too wanted to avoid the classic attached after sex narrative. She also shared that her gynecologist was horrified by the state of her vagina. It was torn and sore for 2 weeks, which I thought was normal at the time because I thought virginity was a physical barrier. Maybe she should have told her partner about being a virgin, but virginity didn't matter to her, whether in the context of her life or if it should have changed how he treated her. Rough sex shouldn't be the go-to without consent. Her advice for me: make sure you're drunk when you have sex for the first time. It helps you loosen up so it won't hurt as much. It shouldn't have to be the advice she thought was best to give, but it was. Thanks to the virginity myth, all she wanted was a good friend. As a good friend, was to make sure I had an experience nothing like hers. Maybe it's because we rarely address how we should feel about sex in general before sex even happens that women are so misguided in their expectations. So, yeah, I was like reading that and I'm like, that's so true. When I would listen to my friends talk about their first sexual experiences with their partners and how they were like, oh, it was horrible, or it was or it was cool, but it was so often coming from a place of misinformation and kind of either like warning me and others like make sure you don't do this to avoid it being awful, or continuing to perpetuate the idea that, oh yeah, it's just gonna be awful and that's okay because that's just how it is, when really it doesn't have to be so awful. um, like there are ways to avoid it being so awful, but the reason why it was so awful is because we're not taught to communicate, to say, I don't like that. Let's try something else, or no, stop, something. And so we just kind of go into it thinking this is going to be a traumatic experience, this rite of passage of trauma, when really, like, it doesn't have to be like that. It shouldn't be like that. Um, yeah, but this is the um, where she talks about, thinking about sex like Disneyland. She says, when I first mentioned I was a virgin to the guy who would eventually be my first, he said, oh, so you're a unicorn, but I wasn't. I never was. Why do people label virginity in a way that makes people feel unwanted after the first time? As a unicorn, I mostly felt confused because people apparently wanted me. A virgin at 25 was supposed to be a unique and rare find, but also too much long term maintenance. And when I did finally have sex, I realized, and maybe he did too, that everyone actually is just a horse. So let's forget the unicorn metaphor because unicorns are just myths too. You know what's real? Disneyland since 1955. The first time at Disneyland can feel like nirvana or be utterly anticlimactic. It depends on a variety of factors. What people told you about Disneyland, who you're going with, the road trip there, the weather, and the other things that are out of your control. Here's the thing though, you can go again. No matter how your first time went, it doesn't have to be your last. Find a better friend, reschedule a less stressful day, or just count your first time as a learning experience because you didn't know you were supposed to ride the slow ones first and Splash Mountain later. And that's kind of the magic of accepting your virginity as an experience and not a state of being. Even if the first, second, or third time wasn't perfect, you can always choose to try again. Or you may choose never to go to Disneyland at all. Some people say it's overrated anyway. The happiest place on earth is where you feel most comfortable, even if it means you never have the urge to do it.
That was good.
Yeah. So, yeah, I was like, wow, that I love that she used, the connection with, going to Disneyland because, yeah, like that is true. When we experience something new, we usually are like, okay, well, that wasn't the greatest, but I'm going to go again. It's kind of like what you were saying before about going to Pride, for the first time. It wasn't, the greatest experiences you ever had, but you now have a decision to make. You're like, okay, well, I could use that as a learning experience, and next year I'll go again, and now I know, you know, what to avoid or what to do differently to have a better experience, or you can make the decision to never go again. But ultimately it's your choice and it's rooted in your agency to make informed decisions. But we can't make informed decisions if we don't get the facts or experience things firsthand. And so I think with the virginity thing, it's like, let's stop freaking out about who's a virgin and who's not, and when we lose our virginity. And I kind of want to get rid of that phrase, lose your virginity. Like, what are we losing? I didn't lose anything. I gained something, even if it was a learning experience, Um, I want us to use words like sexual debut, my first sexual experience, something like that. Because yeah, when I had sex for the first time, I didn't. The only thing I lost was shit that needed to be gone anyway. And in the midst of that, I gained so much. I learned so much about myself. I learned about the person that I had sex with. Obviously, I learned about the world in which I live and the perspectives that I have, and I gained a sense of growth and development that was necessary. I gained a sense of reclaiming of self. I gained the courage to come out. I gained the courage to say fuck you to the constructs, and I gained a sense of peace that I was so longing. All of that came from that one experience. It was the catalyst to it. And so I know, yeah, I didn't lose my virginity. Virginity is not a thing. It just isn't. um but I understand that the idea of virginity or saving yourself for marriage or saving yourself for a particular person is also something that is valuable, you know, as long as that's your choice and that's coming from your sense of conviction and not because you're being threatened with this, ooh, if you have sex, you're gonna get pregnant and die. Or you're gonna be doomed to hell forever, or you're gonna be damaged goods. Like, Let it be because like you want your first sexual experience to be with a particular person within a particular context. Um, which is where I want to go into the abstinence and celibacy thing. Um, I I guess what I want to know for you, Alicia, is what were some of the conversations that were brought up to you about abstinence and celibacy, the choice to abstain from sex.
Um, I mean, pretty much always. I don't. I don't feel like this was a conversation a lot, but whenever it was mentioned, whether by my parents or in church or some adults, it was from the standpoint of um, saving yourself for marriage. Um, so yeah, that was pretty much it. It was pretty much just like presented as I don't think it was ever presented that this is something that people don't do outside of marriage. I think that that was always known, shared, and understood. But it was presented like this is what we're supposed to do and what will be beneficial for you as a Christian yourself for marriage. Now, one thing that I definitely can say was good from my family, and it's so crazy because I can't remember like specific conversations or anything, but I absolutely remember my parents being equal playing field. Like my parents were never the well, kind of, but they weren't really the type to be like, oh, there's these set of rules and things that we have in place or that we believe for girls, and then it's different for the boys. Like that was not a thing. So our parents talking about saving yourself for marriage. They talking about us girls and the boys. Um, excuse me. And even as like things started happening and stuff, then I don't know. My parents, like they present things, and I think that we as individuals can sometimes just have our own fears. Um, still due to lack of knowledge, um, but then also some of that may be honestly like personal convictions or whatever. I don't know. I can't speak for my siblings, but my parents have always been very like straightforward and real about this is what is supposed to be the steps that you take as a Christian. But they've never presented things in the way like they've never been the type to say if you don't do this you're going to hell, or if you don't do this you're gonna be a chewed up piece of gum. Like they've never presented things in that way. Which now that I think about it and the fact that people have those experiences, like I'm extremely grateful because those honestly those are the type of things that the enemy puts in your head if you are raised in a certain way and you're taught like don't do this, it's a bad thing, bad things are going to happen to you if you have sex, and then you go ahead and have sex, then you take that inner voice that was given to you from whoever was telling you that, but also like that's when it changes from um if you are even convicted, because not everybody's convicted, I mean shoot, um it it goes from being like a conviction, like, oh dang, I just feel bad. That's something that like I personally feel like I shouldn't have done. I should have waited, to now being condemnation and you feeling like I'm no longer loved by God. My family is probably gonna throw me away. God is gonna throw me away. Like I'm useless. Like what can I do? Trying to like that's what that puts you in a spiral of like trying to regain love that was never lost. So trying to like constantly work for love, which usually sends people down a path of doing things that are much worse than just having sex because you're trying to find this love that you feel like was taken from you from a simple, very normal human decision that you made. So back to the question. It was presented in a Christian way of
Mm,
like, this is just not what you should do. But if you do, I think my parents have always been good at like, making sure that we know. that like, you're human, you're going to make mistakes and God is still going to love you. But if you could not make those mistakes, or if you could just not do those things, then like that's good. You shouldn't do it, but you're going to do what you want to do, pretty much, which goes back to, I feel like I've shared it on here before, but if not, the one thing that that my mom always, always, always said to us before we went out, especially if we were going out late. It was just during the day, then, whatever. But if we were going out late, my mom's scripture for her kids is always, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the evil and the good. And it's like, by her saying that, she
Mm.
wasn't saying like, God gonna be on your shoulder. Like it wasn't no like creepy shit. It was just the reality. Like this is the scripture. This is the word. This is the reality that like God is everywhere. God sees everything. He knows everything. And that's just what it is. So basically, I'm leaving it up to you. The same free will that God gave you, I'm giving you that free will and just letting you know God gonna be there regardless. So I mean, because he goes to do every, like it's basically like I
Mm.
feel like that's kind of where I've gained the thought process of like, if you gonna do it, then like do it with all your might, like do that shit. And when I say it, I mean whatever it is you gonna do. Like if you about to humiliate yourself, do it and stand behind yourself. Like don't be sorry for it, because you most likely, unless you were really like peer pressured or under some like deep heavy influence, we usually think at least 2-3 times about the things we do before we do them. So it's like, if you're gonna do it, then do it. Stand behind it and then work from there. So my parents pretty much had that view of things with us. Like, hey, don't do this. But if you do, you're gonna be okay.
Mm. So, do you continue to share the that I guess traditional ethic of saving yourself for marriage, or how have your beliefs about sex evolved?
So, it's interesting because I actually was. I wonder how my siblings were. Now that I think about it, I don't know, but I actually did take on the whole like saving myself for marriage. With that though, I have to say it was never like a pressure from my parents. Like even though they did like teach us that, I never felt pressured by my parents to save myself. Like I made the conscious choice. Like yeah, I actually would prefer to wait. That was just me.
Mm.
Um, and then I didn't wait. Well, see, that's the hard part too. It depends on, yeah, whatever. We're gonna keep going on. Um, I didn't wait per se, and I felt bad. But again, it wasn't because of my parents. And honestly, it really wasn't even because of like my relationship with God or anything. It was just me, because I went against what I told myself I wanted to do. Um, so I felt bad, but then I was like, well, this is also nice. So we're just gonna keep going from here. And then I paused for some years and then went back into sexual activity. And since then, um, I'm not really sure how I feel. I mean, for people who want to save themselves for marriage, I feel like even saying save yourself for marriage is like, eh. But who want to wait until marriage, I think that's perfectly fine. Like, that's a choice. That's cool. For those who want to just go ahead and have sex, that's perfectly fine. That's a choice. That's cool. I think where I'm always kind of like, I don't know how I feel is when I get into conversation with people who like, I have to have sex with this person before I get married, because if it's bad, then like we just not gonna be okay. And I'm not saying that that's not the case, because for some people that really is like a huge thing within the relationship. I think for me, now this is based off of my experience. I can't speak from experiences I haven't had that would tell me otherwise. Like, no, what they saying is right. From my experience, I feel like you could almost teach someone how to be great at sex with you. Um, I feel like I'm saying this, and I'm gonna come back to this one day and realize that I met the person who I could not teach, which is gonna be really funny. But but I mean, I like teaching just in general, like all areas of life. I like teaching. Um and I think that just the process of learning your partner's body and just learning them, period. Um During that process, some things like people won't pick up, or there are certain things that you learn about yourself that you can just like teach them or tell them, or like instruct them step by step on how to do it, how to please you. So it's like they really could be bad at sex, but if you give them instructions, I feel like this is not gonna go over well. I just really feel like this comment I feel
What do
like this
you
comment is gonna come back
mean?
and bite me in the ass, and I don't want it. And it's not even because of the fact that like, oh, I'm gonna sound stupid. No, fuck that. I don't care. I just don't ever want to have a bad sex experience. And I know so many people who have, and I make fun of them all the time because it's my friends. And I'm like, see, that's what you get,
Hmm.
because blah blah blah, whatever, just talking shit. Um, because I've honestly never had a bad sex experience. But I feel like we're saying this right now,
Well,
I'm jinxing myself, and I'm a little nervous.
but you'll
I will,
survive.
but ew.
I'm not saying that I hope that for you. I hope that all of your sexual experiences are wonderful and pleasurable and fun. But, like, I guess I get what you're saying. Like, if you get into a relationship with someone and then it turns out they're like, you're just not sexually compatible. Yeah, we can work on it, but it might end up that you're just not
And see,
compatible
that's
in
a
that
that's a
way.
different thing. Like honestly, I wasn't even thinking about it in the sense of compatibility, because when I first started thinking just the whole like, oh, you can teach them, that was before I really like learned the different, like, or I guess experience different levels of compatibility. So that wasn't even really like a factor in my thought process, but now it should be. And so I need to go back and rework some things, because that definitely is the case. Like I've had some good sex experiences with one person, but like they don't give me well, I guess they don't bring the energy out of me like, this is so good, I want to do it as much as possible. It's like I have times where I'm like, okay, yeah,
Hmm.
let's do this. And then other times I'm like, I'm just cool with just chilling. Like, let's just watch TV. But then there's been people who have been like, every time I see you, I'm like, ready, let's go. So yeah.
But I think that speaks more into the reality that we're all compatible in different ways and at different levels. So you may be highly compatible with someone sexually, and maybe that person meets your needs primarily through sex. That's okay, because if one of your needs is to be sexually fulfilled and that person helps you meet that need, then that's to be celebrated and honored. But does that mean that that person is going to be compatible to you in other ways? Maybe not. Maybe you're not compatible romantically, or, they don't really understand you like on an emotional level or whatever. And so you get that need met through someone else, whether that be your friend or, I don't know. And maybe that's why I embrace more of this like anarchist point of view Yes, I'm going to spread the relationship anarchist agenda along with the gay agenda and everything else agenda. But I I think we place so much pressure on finding that one person that's supposed to meet all of our needs. So we think that the person that we're having sex with is also the person that, makes us feel good in other ways. And that might not be the case. Because if you flip the script, like, okay, take you and me, for example, we're friends. You meet my needs in ways, you make me feel good in ways, but that doesn't include
Right.
sex. But you make me feel good in other aspects, and we are compatible in a lot of ways, but there are some ways where we're not compatible, even on a platonic
Hmm.
scale, like if I want to go do a certain thing, I might not call you to do certain things that I know doesn't excite you or fulfill you or is a part of your being or matches your ethics or values, but so if I want to go do something that doesn't isn't really your jive, I'm gonna call somebody else. It doesn't take away the fact that you're my friend and that I love you and that you love me. It's just that we're not compatible in that way. And so we can take that same concept to the people that we're having sex with, the people that we're in romantic partnership with, in the sense that it's possible that the person that fulfills us the most sexually maybe doesn't fulfill us any way else. And it's possible that the person that does fulfill us romantically maybe doesn't fulfill us sexually. But that doesn't mean that we just diminish the relationship altogether. We figure it out.
Okay.
So if you end up being with someone and it wasn't the greatest sexual experience, okay, we learned something. Maybe that person is just supposed to be your lover in other ways that doesn't include sex, and maybe you have to go get sex from somebody that can meet your needs sexually. Or maybe if you're if you're in a place where I would rather not have to, juggle between having my romantic partner and my sexual partner, well, that's what masturbation is for. So because nobody knows you like you know
Period.
you. So, yeah, like there's other ways like to go figure it out, and we have the resources. We have sex therapists, we have sex educators. We're always finding new ways to get off. So, yeah, I don't think you need to be afraid that you're jinxing yourself. But you just give me a call
If it's
if
bad,
if it's bad, and I will totally rub it in
of
your
course,
face
of
and be
course.
like,
Right.
well, you
Honestly,
said.
I would be like, bitch, I knew it
Because
was coming.
yeah, because that's how we're compatible. We like to clown each other. So you meet my needs in that way. Thank
Mm-mm.
you.
You don't have.
So but yeah, I think yeah, my just I was kind of like you. I made the decision to be abstinent, to wait, and then I didn't wait, and it kind of ushered in this moment of like, well, waiting is a choice, but choosing to be sexually active is also a choice too. And it's not the end of the world either way. I haven't had sex with anyone since that time, and part of that, I don't think it's like a conscious choice. It is what it is. I just haven't found anyone that I'm interested in having sex with at this time. Um, well, that's not true. I have met people that I'm like, yeah, I'd have sex with you, but there are just other factors that have been like, not going to pursue that or not able to pursue that or whatever. So it just is just a reality. Um, but I think there are benefits to like definitely being celibate. Like I guess I'm celibate, but not consciously like I'm
Mm.
choosing to abstain, but I just it's just by happenstance. And I guess there are benefits to that, like in the sense that um sometimes you need to take a break from a certain activity to get a sense of clarity in other areas of your life, you know? And it's a good reminder that sex isn't the end all be all of life, you know? That balance is key. And it also reaffirms the value of choice, you know, choosing to be celibate, like, you know, when it's rooted in your choice, like there's beauty in that. But I also recognize that celibacy is also um, often weaponized to place restrictions on people for various reasons, particularly those of us within the LGBT community. You know, this narrative that you can only be gay and Christian if you don't have sex. Well, but what I have to say to that is, you know, what does Jesus actually say about our sexual ethic? Like what it should be? And the answer to that is he didn't really. It was kind of ambiguous as fuck, you know? I think we base a lot of this stuff on the metaphors that like Paul was presenting or like speaking into these larger, broad issues happening within the church, but it can't really speak to every individual person and their partners. I think we can take the principles and apply them how we need to, but just let them be a guideline into the description of our sexual ethic instead of it being prescriptive to one model that might not work for everyone. So I think we can take that same approach we have about all other things we disagree about within our faith context, our political context. You know, we disagree about all sorts of things and we don't make such a big deal out of it. But, you know, I feel like when it comes to sex, it's like, oh my God, can you believe it? But no, just take a deep breath. It's fine. What works for you may not work for somebody else. We can have a conversation and we can move on. But just make sure that you're continuing to stay informed. And like you said, Alicia, let it be rooted in choice and free will because that's the greatest gift that God has given us is free will. So aside from, you know, grace and redemption. So yeah, that's where I'm at with sex right now. um, if there's nothing else, we can move into shameless plug.
Let's get it.
I only have a few things, and they're really just related to this podcast, honestly. Aside from me linking the articles that we mentioned today, um, that'll be in the episode description. But I just wanted to remind everybody that I will be in Illinois July 26th through August 10th. And my availability is still very open to any teaching or subbing or choreography gigs that you might want to throw my way. So please contact me if you want me to do that for you. Would love to be in a creative space. And also for those of you that are listeners, if you're in Illinois, particularly Bloomington Normal area or Chicago land areas, if you want to meet up, let's meet up. Don't be creepy. But I don't know. I'd be down to host like a little meetup or whatever while I'm there, and come hang out with me. Come find me. Um, Also, wanted to remind everybody that after this month, we're going to be taking a hiatus in August to give us a chance to recuperate, to enjoy our travels, and also we're just needing to regroup and brainstorm about what's next for the podcast. It's also going to give me time to work on the website that I'm hoping to drop in September. And also, it gives us time to reacclimate our new addition to our family, Sister Whitney Gaston. Whitney is now going to be our third reoccurring co-host. So she won't be on every single week, but definitely will have much more of a presence, and is definitely the go-to person for a lot of bonus content. And so, yeah, show her some love, follow her on all the social medias, and we just, yeah, we're doing it. And it just feels right to have the PK Club
Woo!
all
Welcome,
together.
Whitney.
Welcome, Whitney. We love you. So, yeah, that's all the shameless plugs I have. I don't know if you have anything.
I do. I would like to shamelessly plug a friend of mine who just dropped her album called
Woo!
Grownish. You can find Dej Monet on all social media platforms. That's DEJMONAE. Two different words, but social media, it'll be all one. But you can also find her album Grown-ish on Apple Music, Spotify, all of that stuff, literally everywhere. She even has videos from her last album on YouTube. Look her up. She's great. She's amazing. She's super young, but like really, really good. And I'm not saying this because this is my friend. This is my friend now. Like I heard her music before I met her.
Mm.
It's dope. Okay. Um, yeah, just check her out. If you are in, well, this will be later, but still, I'm gonna say it. If you're in the Chicago area, look out for her name, just at like shows and stuff. When this episode is released, she would have had a show last week, um, so it's too late for that. But she'll be in plenty of other things, other shows, making stuff happen, and yeah, support. Like, listen to the music first because I want you to support what you really support. But I'm telling you, you're going to support. If you like R&B, you're going to support. That's all I'm saying. So that's Dej Monet, who just dropped her album Grownish. Baby, all through the night I'll make love to you like you want me to, and I'll hold you tight. Baby, all through the night I'll make love to you. I don't know. And I'll
Mm.
never let go. Damn, I don't know those words after that either.
Wow.
I'll make love to you. I should learn the words before I try to sing a song. But you got the
Mm.
gist.
I
Okay?
got the
It was
gist.
about sex and making love and all that gushy stuff.
Yeah. I That was great. That was beautiful.
Thank you, thank you.
Even if you didn't know the
Thank you so
words.
much.
I thought you was gonna go, if I want to take a guy home with me tonight, it's none of your business.
Okay.
And she want to be a freak
Mm.
and settle it on the
Oh,
weekend. It's none of your
yeah.
business. Now you
Oh,
shouldn't
hey.
even.
Okay, okay. So you up then. Hey.
Well, I mean, but you went the R&B route,
I
and
did.
so yeah, that's a good song. Or like, can we
Yes,
talk
hey.
for a
A
minute?
minute.
Girl, I want to know your name. Can we talk for a minute? Girl, I want to know your name.
Listen,
Hey.
listen, listen here, bitch. You're singing. Well, this has been a wonderful continuation of our sex talk month. I'm excited for the rest of the month.
Me
Good
too.
stuff.
We're going to have a special guest. I can't wait.
Facts, facts, facts.
Facts.
Thank you.
Well, guys, stay blessed. I hope you're having good sex if you want to. And if you don't want to have sex, then that's fine too.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes. And let's pray for Alicia's sex life really quick and make sure that.
That I never experienced.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
We want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in. Continue the conversation with us. Develop a community with other misfits and mystics like us, and get your latest updates on Shameless Plugs and other news by following us on social media. We are on Instagram at Misfits and Mystics Pod, Twitter at Misfits Mystics, and we also have a Facebook page that you can like and share.
Want to reach us directly? Shoot us an email at misfitsandmysticspod@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you, and with your permission, we might give you a shout out on future episodes.
Don't forget to subscribe on whatever streaming service you're using to stay up to date on newest episodes being released.
Leave us a review on iTunes to help us gain more visibility. Plus, we appreciate the feedback.